Les habla Pocho Salcedo y damos la bienvenida a nuestra audiencia en el Cono Sur y a todos aquellos que nos acompañan de costa a costa en los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica. Una vez más, invitándolos desde el Estudio 3 aquí en Nueva York a una caminata que va más allá de los titulares. Bienvenidos al ADN de las noticias. Hace más de 232 años se propusieron 12 enmiendas a la Constitución de los Estados Unidos. De esas, 10 fueron aprobadas. Entre esas enmiendas hay una que ha sido objeto de argumentos desde el día en que se presentó para su consideración. En Estados Unidos es un derecho constitucional la tenencia de armas. Se estima que un promedio de 120 armas están en manos por cada 100 ciudadanos estadounidenses y hay más de 300 milicias armadas operando en el país. Hoy contamos con un experto en el tema que nos ayudará a desentrañar la historia y sus consecuencias modernas de esta segunda enmienda a la Constitución, el derecho a portar armas. Dr. Elijah Gold, welcome to the show.
Ocho, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to join you.
Elijah Gould is professor of history at the University of New Hampshire. He has published extensively on the history of the American Revolution, including the origins of the Anglo-American right to bear arms. His most recent book is Among the Powers of the Earth, The American Revolution and the Making of a New World Empire in 2012. Named a Library Journal Best Book of the Year, it received the Society for Historians of the Early American Republic's Book Prize and was a finalist for the George Washington Book Prize. A Japanese language edition was published in 2016.
Dr. Gold, we are going to be talking about a delicate issue, but as an American, you have early contact with weapons. This is not just a theoretical discussion for you. You're a historian. Tell us about your first experience with firearms and whether you use them now or not.
So thank you, Pocho, for that question. Yes, I grew up in central Pennsylvania. My mother's family is from Western Kentucky. Anyone who knows the geography of the United States knows that that's hunting country. So I grew up, I think the first time I fired a weapon was a shotgun on a cousin's farm in Kentucky, probably when I was 6 years old. So I don't currently hunt, but I grew up hunting both deer and pheasant. And I quite enjoy shooting a shotgun. I still do shoot skeet. So I'm by no means anti-weapon. And I would say that in my hometown in central Pennsylvania, there were a lot of families who hunting deer meant that they would actually have meat on the table during the winter. They're families for whom hunting is an important part of making ends meet. And I've always thought of that as part of the story. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that.
It is commonly stated that there are 120 weapons for every 100 citizens in the United States, but we did not start that way. Let us go to the genesis of this process. What does history tell us about the possession of guns from colonial times?
Pocho, yeah, that's a great question. We are indeed a very heavily armed republic. Firearm ownership was common in the 13 colonies that became the United States at the time of the Revolution. I can't give you exact figures, and that's actually been the subject of some controversy, just how widespread it was. But it was widespread enough so that the framers of the Constitution wrote the right to bear arms into the Second Amendment to the Constitution, which was the part of the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, adopted after the Constitution was ratified in 1790 and 1791.
So let us go to 1789. The Second Amendment was proposed to Congress. How did it happen? Why and what those discussions were like?
Okay, so the Constitution, which was drafted in Philadelphia during the summer of 1787, created a much stronger government than the much stronger central government, I should say, than the loose-knit Union of States, which was originally envisioned under the Articles of Confederation, and that's the Union's first constitution. And under the Articles, there was a central government, but it had very weak powers. So the framers of the Constitution sought to create a much stronger central government. In fact, that government was so strong that a lot of Americans worried that it was too strong. And during the ratification process, and the Constitution was submitted to conventions in the 13 states with the question of whether or not to ratify it. And in a number of those conventions, the opponents of ratification, who were known as anti-federalists, succeeded in exacting a promise from the Constitution's supporters, who were known as Federalists, that as soon as the Constitution went into effect, that Congress would approve 10 amendments to the Constitution clarifying the rights of the states and of the individuals. And those 10 amendments, which became the Bill of Rights, would be submitted to the states and they would be ratified. So the ratification process is very contested, a lot of discussion and concern over how strong this new Constitution was making the federal government is subject to this back and forth process. The compromise is these 10 amendments to the Constitution, the second of which concerned the right to bear arms.
And why was the right to bear arms a concern, and why did it become an amendment?
Yeah, so the big concern was that in the Constitution gives Congress and the president command of the militia. But it doesn't say anything about what the militia, it doesn't actually guarantee the militia. And for viewers, there were two military institutions at the time of the Revolution. One was a regular army. That's a professional standing army that is fully under the command of the central government. The other was a militia, which was a unit of citizen soldiers drawn from the population, oftentimes bearing their own arms. Sometimes militia units are armed out of public armories, but oftentimes they do bring their own arms to public service. And there was a lot of concern that the safest way to defend the republic is with a militia. And so the Second Amendment to the Constitution guarantees the states and citizens the right to participate in a militia. And it mentions well-regulated militia, and it also mentions the right to bear arms, the assumption being that those arms are there for service in a militia.
Thank you. We go to about 232 years later, and we have a modern society. I'm referring to what Justice Anthony Scalia wrote, that the amendment protects a right to possess a firearm unconnected to military service, and that individuals are free to use such weapons. However, in the Benitez decisions, the individual right is accepted. He also added citizen militias to the mix, which is where we're now. So please explain these two situations.
So, well, we have to go back to the first decision that you referred to by Antonin Scalia, written by former Supreme Court Justice Scalia in 2008. The opinion was District of Columbia v. Heller. And in there, the Supreme Court determined that the right to bear arms in the Second Amendment applied not just to the right to bear arms collectively in a well-regulated militia, but that it also guaranteed an individual right to keep arms in your household, say for self-defense, in the event of a burglary or some kind of violent attack, or also for hunting. So that it's not just a collective right, it's also an individual right. And Justice Scalia, in writing this opinion, resolved what had been a very contested and kind of inconclusive debate between historians and legal experts that have been going on for a number of years over what sort of right the Second Amendment guaranteed. Was it a collective right in service in the militia, or was it an individual right? And what Scalia did was to guarantee that individual right without any connection to military service. And that law or opinion still remains in place. So today, Americans have an individual right to bear arms. Now, the decision that you just referred to was from earlier this year by Judge Benitez, a district court judge, federal district court judge in California, who upheld the individual right to bear arms. And in the process, he struck down a ban on assault weapons that had long been in place in the state of California. And it's important to realize that most of the firearm regulations in the United States operate on a state level. So it's, state by state. And in California, the legislature enacted a ban on assault-style rifles like the AR-15. And Judge Benitez struck that ban down. In the course of his opinion, he invoked Heller, but he went beyond Heller and said an assault-style weapon could also be a good weapon for service in what he called a citizen's militia, a private citizen's militia. And for some people, that actually raised a red flag. He's actually bringing the militia back in, but what he's talking about is not a well-regulated militia, as it's understood in the Second Amendment. That is a militia armed, trained, and commanded by the government, either the state government or the federal government, but potentially a self-constituted militia that would muster and form and train without any authorization from the government. And that is certainly changing the right as Scalia depicted it in DCB Heller.
In his writings, Justice Scalia makes a point that the right is not unlimited, and he wrote about dangerous weapons.
Yes, and that it's really important. Viewers, you can find the opinion, Justice Scalia's opinion. It's very well written. It's got a sense of humor. I mean, it actually, you wouldn't think it's enjoyable to read a Supreme Court decision, but Scalia was a very good writer. And he makes clear in there that affirming an individual right to bear arms under the Constitution, the Second Amendment, is not an unlimited right. There are all sorts of weapons that we as American citizens are not allowed to have. I don't think we're allowed to have a tank. We can't have nuclear warheads. These are extreme cases, but Scalia talks about those. And he does make clear that there may be dangerous weapons that governments on the state or even municipal city level have the right to regulate and prohibit. And he also makes clear that governments have the right to regulate how we bear arms. We don't necessarily have a right for concealed weapons. We don't necessarily have a right to bring a weapon into sensitive places like a church, place of worship. You can't bring a gun past security into an airport. The Second Amendment does not allow us to do that. So Scalia was very clear that in an affirming a right to bear arm, he was not striking down all regulations. And in fact, the right to bear arms has always been a regulated right. And that goes back to the colonial and revolutionary era.
Well, this is just the beginning of this journey. We will be right back and explore more issues that are typically not brought to our attention. Thank you very much, Dr. Gold, for helping us to navigate this. We will be right back.
We go beyond the headlines. World-class experts and newsmakers from all continents come to explain vital events in our region and the world. Deeper than the headlines, our epicenter is at the core of the news. We explore current events in a spirited and responsible manner. When producing an episode, we think first of you and the tools you need to be truly informed. The DNA of the news. Knowing makes all the difference.
Es posible que llegase a las costas de Terranova.
What matters is the actual impact of the culture that they created.
We will start with a broad question. Reading your book, it will seem that the general idea that we have of contemporary...
The DNA of the news.
Aprovechamos esta oportunidad para saludar a dos de nuestras estaciones en los Estados Unidos, KGEM en Monrovia, Baldwin Park, Duarte, en el estado de California, y The People's Channel en Durham, Chapel Hill, Hillsborough, Petersboro, estado de Carolina del Norte. And we are back with Dr. Elijah Gold. He joins us from the state of New Hampshire. Welcome back. I have a question for you about that argument that we hear all the time, that the laws restricting guns infringe upon our right to self-defense. According to the NRA, they brought up a statistic that indicates that every year guns are used 2.5 million times for self-defense. And the restrictions on weapons make it very difficult for citizens to defend their homes and their families. Your thoughts about it, please.
Yeah, so Pocho, that is that's actually that's a big part of this debate, and there've been a lot of studies done on this various ways. One statistic that is certainly out there is that if you have firearms around the house, there is a danger that they can be used accidentally. And every year, I don't have the statistics in front of me, there are accidental homicides where, say, a child got access to a gun. And of course, there are ways to protect against that. Mandatory gun locks are part of the law in many localities. There also are connections between firearms and suicide rates. If it's harder to get your hands on a firearm, you might be less likely to take your own life. On the other side, there also are studies that show that hot burglaries, that is, burglaries that happen when the homeowner is at home, are less likely in jurisdictions where gun ownership is widespread. I've actually been hot burgled in London, and I've always wondered, would that have been less likely to happen if firearm ownership was widespread? So, I think it's important to have open debate on both sides of this. But yeah, that is the argument, and the NRA draws a lot of support from people who fear for their safety and feel that they would be safer if they actually had a firearm in their possession. And of course, then the question is, how safe are you if you actually have a firearm in your possession? And there are studies that cut both ways on that. I think it has to be said. I don't think that's a settled debate.
Strangely enough, the Constitution in 37 U.S. states specifically speak about the right to bear arms, some more liberal than others, for self-defense, the protection of homes and family, and the protection against the federal government based on the distrust to the government as one of the reasons to bear arms. Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, that is a harder case to make. The Second Amendment to the Constitution only guarantees a well-regulated militia. So, I suppose potentially the individual right is there against a tyrannical government. But basically, since the American Revolution, the guarantee against a tyrannical government is at the ballot box. And this is actually part of the history here in New Hampshire. We are one of the states where the right to bear arms is in our Constitution, our state Constitution. We also have something that is misunderstood up here as a right of revolution. The 10th article of our Constitution guarantees us the right to change our government. But what that is actually guaranteeing is a right of peaceful resistance. And it's affirming also a right, the right to vote. And sometime about 150 years ago, a lawmaker wrote the caption "Right to Revolution" above that. This happened in the 1860s. But when that article was adopted after the Revolution, that is not the way it was understood. It was not, in fact, sanctioning a right to violently overturn the government. So it's even though the United States was founded as the result of a violent revolution, there's a long legal tradition of keeping the right to bear arms under the control of a legally constituted body.
Thank you very much. Please help us understand this theory that attempts to explain the Second Amendment, individual rights theory, and the collective rights theory. I think they go to the core of the issue.
So I'm not sure if this is what you're getting at. Well, the story of the Bill of Rights, that is these 10 amendments, is that initially they were much more about states' rights than they were individual rights. And that's true of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, initially, what it was really protecting was the rights of the states to maintain a well-regulated militia for their own defense. And only gradually did it even become a matter of individual rights. And the big transformational moment is the ratification of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War. This is also the amendment that guarantees rights of citizenship to all individuals born in the United States. It's a big, important part of our immigration debate as well. But it's the 14th debate that turns the right of freedom of worship and individual expression in the First Amendment into an individual right. And it's also the 14th Amendment that turns the right to bear arms into an individual right. Before, the late 1860s, when the 14th Amendment is written, the Second Amendment doesn't really have much to do with individual rights. It's more about the rights of the states.
Well, in a practical way, how do you see this developing? The toothpaste is out of the tube. There are weapons, illegal and legal. How should a country like the United States approach this situation? What would be one of the solutions?
Well, it's important for me to say here, I'm not a lawyer. So I'm a historian, although I do the history of the law, but you might need to get an attorney on here, a trained lawyer, to give you a really good answer. But my hunch is that the way forward is going to lie through regulation. We know that historically the right to bear arms has always been a regulated right, just as the right to drive is a regulated right, or the right to fly is a regulated right. So too the right to bear arms. If you owned a gun, you had to submit to regulation in early America. People come around to make sure it was in working order, that you knew how to use it, that you had the necessary munitions. The owning a weapon always meant that some local authority had the right to make sure that you were owning and using it in the right way. And so it's not if we are really true to that original meaning, we recognize that. And there are all sorts of regulations that could go into place that could easily make the ownership of firearms safer. And that would include keeping them out of the hands of people who demonstrably have shown that they can't use them responsibly. That I don't think is inconsistent with the original meaning of the right to bear arms as understood at the time of our founding.
This is a global show, and we have people from different places in the world watching it. How can you explain this peculiar tradition in the United States that I don't think will go away for a long time? Possession of arms seems from the outside as an unusual way of conducting a society.
Well, the United States, we are Americans, U.S. Americans are a very individualistic people. We are also very distrustful of the government, and that's actually true on the left as well as the right. I mean, there is a tradition of defending the right to bear arms on the left. It's not just a conservative position. And I think that is here for a long time. Oftentimes that individual tradition, that tradition at odds with the government, has been, they're countervailing forces that cut in the other direction. There also is a tradition in the United States of protecting the power of the government and looking to the government to protect individuals from people who would abuse rights like the right to bear arms. So, in fact, we're a nation founded on an argument. It's not as though one side has the whole truth here. And if we had more time, I could go into that side of our history as well. It's not as though there's just one side to it. We're a nation founded on argument and debate. That there's a long, long American tradition of that too.
We thank you so very much for making such a complex theme and breaking it into pieces that we can understand. This was helpful, and I hope you come back to the show again. This is something that we will be debating for a long time. I saw your writings, and I also saw that the intensity of the responses that you received. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bocho. It's my pleasure. If I've shed any light on this, I will have done my duty.
Thank you very much. El núcleo de este debate es si la enmienda protege el derecho a los particulares a poseer y portar armas o si en cambio protege derechos colectivos que debe ejercerse solamente a través de unidades formales de milicias. Para algunos es ambas cosas. Al mismo tiempo, hubiera sido imposible para los proponentes de la enmienda hace más de 230 años imaginar los giros y vueltas de nuestra sociedad actual, sus consecuencias no deseadas. La respuesta no es simple. La pasta de dientes está fuera del tubo y es imposible volverla a poner de nuevo. ¿Cuál es la solución sensata? Bueno, la solución está sujeta a discusiones vigorosas y urgentes. Hasta una próxima oportunidad, cuando juntos exploremos el ADN de las noticias. Gracias por el privilegio de su compañía.